In a desolate wasteland, Rick gets launched several feet across the floor during a fight, and he is seriously worried that he may die. Just then, his mentors emerge from the smoke, and rather than administer some first aid, they praise him for improving so much over the past 2 years of training, so he should have no problem with the E-rank adventurer exams now. And the praise is nice, but he still needs medical attention. Normally, the adventurers in this world are all young people due to all the strain that it would put on a person's body, but there are still some adults who never give up on their dreams, and that's why Rick is still trying to take the entrance exam. He walks up to the reception desk and asks for his exam ticket to be issued. But while the receptionist is confirming his details, she happens to recognize Rick and excitedly reminds him that used to know each other. Rick doesn't recognize her at first, but he soon recalls that he last saw her 2 years ago. They used to be co-workers, and she was really shocked when Rick resigned from his position out of nowhere, but even more so when she heard that he quit his job to become an adventurer. Rick is a little embarrassed since people in their 30s like him usually wouldn't apply to become adventurers. Normally, you'd start at G-rank in your teens and work your way up to E within a year or two. The receptionist asks what Rick has been up to these past 2 years since she hadn't heard from him at all. So Rick explains that he was pretty much cooped up in the mountains the entire time so that he could train with his mentors. Just then, the guild's usual drunkard walks up to the front desk and starts trying to flirt with the receptionist. But when she tries to decline because she is still obviously working, the guy doesn't take no for an answer, so he starts getting a little rough with the receptionist. And that's when Rick decides to step in, so he pulls the guy aside and lightly tabs his stomach with enough force to knock him out instantly. The receptionist apologizes for the inconvenience the drunk guy caused him, but Rick says it's fine since he used to work as a receptionist as well, and he still doesn't understand why the guild thinks it is a good idea to serve alcohol in here. After Rick receives his exam number, he heads outside where a maid named Renette greets him. She asks if Rick is done with his registration, and Rick confirms as much, thanking her for waiting for him. And while he says this, he is intently staring at Renette's huge jiggly puffs. She calls him out on this, so Rick tries to change the subject and talk about how excited he is for the exam. Back inside, the other adventurers are in shock at the handprint that was left on the drunk guy's armor, and that armor was made of dense steel, so whoever did this must be seriously strong. Just then, two guys walk in and recognize the drunk guy from a mugshot they saw a while back. His name is Domold, and he is an A-rank adventurer who's wanted for 30 counts of assault. The receptionist knows that Rick is the one who did this, but if he was really able to take out an A-rank adventurer, then he may be overqualified. In the meantime, Rick is getting a physical exam done, and its height is measured to be about 5'8", but the physician are surprised Rick is taking this test when he's already 32 years old. After that, all the examinees are led to the next room where they are instructed to place their hands on the crystal ball to measure their mana. They will glow depending on the level of mana a person possesses, so the others touch it, they get varying results with the highest being a C, but when it's Rick's turn, the orb barely lights up at all, so the examiner gives Rick an F on his mana exam. The other candidates begin mocking Rick for having such a low mana score as he leaves, but once the examiner calls for the next candidate to step up, the orb spontaneously shatters. The next test is one to measure the candidate's offensive abilities, so they are instructed to strike the green rod as hard as they can. It is a special slime bag that can absorb a lot of impacts, so they don't need to worry about damaging it. Rick remembers training with a slime bag once, and at the time, one of his mentors told him that he had to be able to destroy a golden slime bag with nothing but his fists. Rick didn't think that was possible since a golden slime bag is as hard as a dragon's fang, but his mentor told him that it was the least he had to do if he wanted to become an adventurer, and since his mentor was able to effortlessly destroy one with a single punch, Rick became motivated to train until it broke, even if he had to punch it 50,000 times a day. He hated that training, but back to the present, the candidates begin lining up in to strike the bag with all their might, and after the first guy has kicked it, the next candidate called up is the second son of the Dermir family, and it is rumored that his magic is as strong as a C-rank adventurer's despite only being 11 years old. As the boy begins, he casts a Hellflame spell, and everyone is surprised, including Rick. Although he's surprised because the spell is so tiny, the fireball is launched and hits the target, and the judges are actually impressed by the kid's output, so Rick is even more shocked since the fireballs his magic teacher would throw at him were far more deadly than what that kid just used. Naturally, Rick assumes the kid's fireball must have been just as powerful as his teacher's fireball, but maybe the kid shrunk it down so that it wouldn't destroy the building. As the attack power exam goes on, it eventually gets to Rick's turn, but as he is walking up to the slime bag, the examiner calls his attention and asks if he is really over 30 years old. Rick answers yes, so the examiner tells him that he is too old to be doing stuff like this. Training usually doesn't yield much of a result unless it is started very early on in life, and with how bad his mana exam score was, he should just quit before he makes a fool of himself. Rick knows people are judging him for being too old, and he really feels like giving up, but he has worked too hard to get to this point, punching slime bags until his knuckles were red with blood, and he still kept punching. All that pain has to count for something, so even if he is at a disadvantage for being old, he's going to give this everything he's got. Rick winds up his punch, and as he makes contact with the bag, it splatters everywhere and goes flying through the wall, leaving everyone shocked, including Rick's, since he wasn't expecting the bag to be so weak. The kid can't believe what he just witnessed, and he is frustrated by Rick's success, since this was supposed to be his stage to shine on, but he can accept losing to Rick for now since his specialty is really defensive magic, so he will make sure to outperform Rick on the next test. However, by the time they start the next test, the kid is left speechless as Rick has just tanked a 4th nature spell with ease. The examiner compliments Rick on being skilled enough to block his attacks, and Rick appreciates it, since he is doing his best. The instructor doesn't think Rick is actually giving it his all since he has just been using a first nature spell to defend himself so far, so he advises Rick to use a higher tier of defensive magic from now on. However, Rick informs him that he doesn't actually know how to use any other spells aside from first order ones, so he really is doing the best he can. The examiner can't believe Rick is actually only capable of using first order spells since he has such precise control over his mana, but Rick assures him that there won't be any problems since, from what he has seen so far, his first order spells should be more than enough to handle anything the examiner can throw at him. The examiner takes that as a personal insult, so he prepares to use a 5th order spell to show Rick that he shouldn't take someone like him lightly. As he casts the spell and unleashes a shock cyclone, a massive shockwave echoes through the kingdom, so far that even a knight on the other side of town could hear it. A few minutes later, Sylvester arrives at the exam center to figure out what's going on over here. He is informed that an F-rank adventurer managed to completely destroy a slime bag with his bare hands and perfectly block a 5th nature spell while only using basic defense magic. Sylvester thinks she must be playing a prank on him or something, but she is dead serious about everything she just told him. Right now, Rick is busy taking the written part of this exam, and he looks like he's confident in his knowledge for this one. After the test is over, Rick takes a break with Rionette, and she asks him how the written test went. Rick confidently answers that he is sure he will get 100% on the written test. After all, he spent 14 years working as a receptionist for the guild, so there's no way he could fail. However, he's still not sure his overall scores will be good enough to pass the exam. Rionette asks if Rick is worried about his practical exam scores, but he thinks he did pretty well in all the categories. However, he still got an F on his mana exam, so he's not sure how that will affect his chances of passing. Rionette assures Rick that he should be fine after all the training he did to prepare for this exam, but moments later, the kid from earlier comes up to Rick and screams at him for doing too well on the tests. Rick doesn't know what this is about, so he assumes Freed must have gotten lost or something, so he offers to help him. Freed is upset because this was supposed to be the day he showed off his exceptional skills to all the peasants, but Rick went and outperformed him, so he's crying about it now. Rick tries to tell Freed that he didn't intend to steal his spotlight, but Freed's sister has already arrived, and after seeing her little brother crying, she immediately starts yelling at Rick. Rick asks if she is related to Freed by any chance, so she introduces herself as Angelica Diremute, and Freed wastes no time in telling her that this 40-year-old man ruined his day. Rick is offended and says he is only 30, but Angelica and Freed keep calling him a 40-year-old man. Eventually, Angelica throws her glove at Rick to challenge him to a duel, and Rick doesn't realize that it's a challenge, so he picks up the glove because he doesn't want it to get stained. Unfortunately, as per noble customs, picking up that glove is a declaration of intent to throw hands, so Angelica happily sets a venue for them to begin the fight. She says she is going to take great pleasure in punishing Rick for the crime of making her brother cry, but if they are going to do this, then they have to play by the rules. Duels in the Fylheim Kingdom allows the winner to set a penalty for the loser if they win, so she sets a penalty stating that the loser will have to serve the winner for the rest of their life. Angelica is apparently a second-class royal knight, but Rick doesn't know how strong a second-class knight is supposed to be, so Rionette gives him some context and explains that a second-class knight would be around B rank. Rick starts freaking out because he knows B rank adventurers are able to take out huge monsters on their own, but Rionette doesn't think it's a big deal and asks Rick to hold back so he doesn't end up killing her. Rick can't imagine holding back against someone at B rank while he is still F rank, since he still has no context for how strong he truly is, so Rionette tells him to just have faith in all the training he has done for the last 2 years. All of a sudden, all the traumatic training montages he had to go through come flooding into his mind, so he ends up throwing up. Rick curses Rionette for making him relive such torture. But she reminds him that if he was able to survive all that, then he shouldn't have a problem handling Angelica. After all, he's a member of the strongest party on the continent, so he should have a little more faith in himself. Rick realizes that she's right, so he gets up to face Angelica with no fear. He is still not sure how well his current level of strength will hold up against a second-class knight, but there's no use worrying about it now. Angelica is confident that she is much stronger than Rick, so she promises to hold back against him so that he doesn't die, and then begins charging up her attack. She then uses Blink Step to dash past Rick, just to show him how fast she is. Her speed has earned her the title of Lightspeed Angelica, and Rick is definitely surprised, but not for the reason she thinks. Angelica says she will now finish him off with her next attack, so she uses Blink Step again. But as she's approaching Rick, he can't believe what he's seeing because Angelica is moving so slow. The power scales must have been high on copium if they thought she was worthy of the Lightspeed title, because she is moving slower than his normal running speed. Rick easily dodges her strike, and Angelica can't believe it since it should be impossible for an F-rank adventurer to keep up with her speed. In fact, only first-class knights have ever managed to react to her speed, so she rationalizes it by saying Rick just got lucky, but she won't let it happen again. She uses Blink Step once more, but in Rick's eyes, she is still moving really slow, so he wonders how she could have possibly made it to B rank like this. He is starting to realize that he may actually be pretty strong, but just as he is getting ready to dodge Angelica's attack, she trips on a rock and briefly unlocks the vertical B-blade attack. Rick can't predict any of the strikes, so he is having trouble dodging, and by the time Angelica finally stops herself, he no longer thinks he can call himself strong because he was completely unprepared for that attack. However, neither was Angelica because she didn't plan any of that. She tries to play it cool and tells Rick she's impressed that he managed to dodge her last attack because she totally meant to do that, but that just means she will have to go even faster to overwhelm him. She uses her special technique, which allows her to move 3 times faster than normal. But even though she is 3 times faster, she is still pretty slow to Rick. However, he chooses not to attack carelessly since he doesn't know what kind of tricks she might have up her sleeve, so he dodges instead, and Angelica is left flabbergasted that Rick can still keep up with her. She can only use that technique 2 more times before she runs out of energy, so she gives it everything she has and goes for one last desperate attack. However, she trips once more, so Rick tries to intercept her with a punch and ends up blowing a hole in the ground. Angelica realizes that she would have died from a punch like that if it had connected, so she is terrified of Rick and questions who he really is. Rick just says he is a former receptionist turned adventurer. He is eager to continue his fight with Angelica, so he climbs out of the hole to face her again, but Angelica immediately surrenders so she doesn't end up getting killed. Rick doesn't understand why she is giving up, but her surrendering makes him the winner, and as per the penalty Angelica set, she now has to serve him for the rest of her life. Angelica had forgotten all about that penalty, so she does the only thing she can think to do and runs away. Rick doesn't really care about the bet, so he doesn't chase after her, and the results of the exam will be coming out soon, so he needs to go back to check if he passed. This is when Rinette tells Rick that the rest of his mentors will be coming to check on him, and Rick starts freaking out because their presence always spells trouble. This was the end of episode 1. Subscribe to not miss the next part.